Alright, hello everyone. Welcome to a little bit of a shorter video. I want to say thank you for all of the amazing support on Kevin Control. This has been a little bit of a request. It's been a can you give a little bit of a mulligan guide? So this is literally going to be quite short, quite simple. I was digging for a mulligan simulator. This is the only one that I could really come up with right now. If someone has a better suggestion that doesn't have as much busyness on the screen, I would appreciate it. However, we are going to look at just to give you a basic understanding of the mulligan, and what you may expect going forward with this. We're going to ignore. I want you to ignore everything on this screen apart from the 7 cards. So we're going to just do a couple test mulligans, and I'll give you my insight as to why I think you should keep cards. This one on screen right now is actually a very, very good hand in a lot of ways, so we're going to get rid of this immediately. And then, what do I just say, mulligan again? Okay, so now let's say this is a blind mulligan. We are going first. We have no knowledge of what your opponent is playing whatsoever. Immediately, whether you're going first or second, this is a relatively simple mulligan. Raging Storm is never staying in an opening hand. It is an ACOS uninkable. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. I understand it's very, very powerful and very useful, but it's very useful late game, not now. World's Greatest Criminal Mind is far too situational for this. Same goes for Battering Ram. Inkcaster is not needed early. Potion of Malice is maybe the only arguable you could keep cards. Strange Things is very good. However, again, when you have nothing else in your hand that's remotely usable, I kind of don't like holding it. So I think this is kind of your comfortability situation. I would either just mull 7 here or hold the potion. In this state, we're going to hold the potion and see how it pays off. So here we got Sabotage, Criminal Mind, Strange Things, Pizza Planet, Raging Storm, Strange Things. Again, the early inks here are going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to, anytime you open a game state with either your location or your Kevin, they are pretty much your guaranteed inks early game. It's why a lot of people are starting to cut Kevin entirely, because they feel that early game, if you're always inking Kevin, late game, you don't necessarily need Kevin. It's like, well, why are we playing it? There are a lot of situations where you simply get to 10 to 15 lore, and the Inkcasters are not gaining you lore quickly enough to close out the game state. So having the Kevin just to have a much more consistent out is really helpful. So here we have another flat opening. We're going to, again, assume we're doing a blind mulligan here. Adventure Book is very, very clearly the best card here. To me, again, this is fairly straightforward. We don't see value in Inkcaster early game, but we do obviously want to keep them, which means we don't really want to discard them off of strike. Malicious, Mean, and Scary is too situational, and therefore in a blind mulligan is not necessary to keep. To Wither a Flower, I would almost always mulligan. I really see no value, even in an aggro matchup, to hold this card. Strike a Good Match is incredibly, incredibly strong, and it's one of our most important tools in the whole deck, so I would always keep these. An Adventure Book. This, if you see an opening hand, regardless of what your matchup is, Adventure Book, in my opinion, should always be kept. I think it is the most important card to keep, apart from maybe Buzz's Arm. I think these Buzz's Arm and Adventure Book are the two you always keep. Strike a Good Match, there's a very strong argument that you also always keep, but you don't necessarily always have to keep multiple of them. This feels pretty self-explanatory. Outside of that, the rest, To Wither a Flower is far too situational early game. MMS is, while strong, not really needed here. Inkcaster, I don't really feel is great here. And we are replaced with, honestly, a pretty nice curve. Our turn 1 ink will always be Kevin here, and if we don't draw into another inkable rather, it's probably going to just be the World's Greatest Criminal Mind, or the second strike, depending on how comfortable you are. I would probably just ink the Criminal Mind, play the strike, and then probably discard the To Wither a Flower. And that's your early turn 1, turn 2. And then after the fact, your inks are important. I will talk about inks and stuff a bit more in depth in a second. But let's say now we are going in and we know we're playing against Amber Emerald Aggro. What is our, let's say it is our worst matchup. It is our worst matchup. What do we do? How do we navigate that? So, immediately we have a copy of Inscrutable Map. This can be really helpful. However, Inscrutable Map is arguably at its best with a Buzz's Arm. The Strange Things could be really useful here. I don't value having 2 of them. I think it's a little unnecessary. I think this probably goes, this goes. I would say the second Strange Things goes. I probably, in my opinion, would also get rid of the MMS here. I don't really think it's necessary, but we have 2 cards that are stalling us a turn or 2 for the aggro matchup to just try and get to that late game. We really want to see Buzz's Arms here because we want to try and rush to that Raging Storm quicker. And while we didn't see it, the inks are really, really, really strong here. We have 3 cards that can pretty much get inked 1, 2, 3. They aren't serving much purpose at all to you. However, in the aggro matchup, there is an argument that instead of playing Adventure Book on 3, maybe you play Map on 3 just to buy yourself a turn consistently. I don't necessarily. I still am of the opinion that you probably do play Book, because if your hand doesn't have the board wipe or doesn't have the answers in hand, then you need to dig for them. The strike is always your turn 2 play, meaning that you could probably maybe dig for an arm, and that could make things a little easier, or you could dig for the Raging Storm, so you know you have it. These 3 are the easy inks early game, and then you just have to try and navigate with these 4 cards, and really push through that aggression, and just hope that they don't have like a double Eleanor, because if they have a double Eleanor, there's very little I feel like you can do anyway. So let's do a couple more aggro mulls. Potion of Malice, very good in this. Strange Things, very good in this. Strike, very good in this. So I think we're gonna immediately remove To Wither a Flower. Whilst yes, very good into aggro. In my opinion, just far too slow here. I would definitely get rid of one of the strikes in this sort of matchup and one of the books. I think the Potion, Book, Strange Things hand is pretty strong alongside a Strike a Good Match. There's an argument that if you really, really just know how quick their deck goes, the States of Pocahontas and Miko, that maybe you actually get rid of the book here too. I think these 3 are essential. I think Strange Things is far too important in this matchup for you to mulligan it at any point. Potion is really strong here too, especially if you do find a Malicious, Mean, and Scary. And there it is. So the Malicious, Mean, and Scary Potion of Malice turn will buy you a full board turn alongside Strange Things really helping. I think this is a fairly decent curve for your aggro matchup. I think Kevin is always the first ink, Freeze the Vine is always the second ink, and then Strike a Good Match, probably discarding Piercing Attack here. Everything else here is very, very strong. I think this is a honestly pretty good aggro mull. Okay, so now we're finally seeing a Buzz's Arm. This is a Buzz's Arm aggro mulligan, and with that being the case, we are absolutely holding both arms because we are recognizing that what we need to see here is an early board wipe. I'm going to apologize, there may be some sound in the background today. I'm going to try and mess with that a little bit. I don't have a huge amount of time to work on this today, so I just wanted to give you something a little more succinct and quick. But yeah, we definitely hold both Buzz's Arms and hold the Potion of Malice. I think this is a pretty comfortable curve. If we see a Raging Storm here, whilst, yes, it's stuck in your hand, you're getting it on turn 6, which might just be enough for you. And that is exactly what we see. The Scattered is a little bit of a brick to have at this point, and I think you may struggle somewhat having it in hand. Kevin will always be first ink. Truthfully here, I do think, unfortunately, the ink curve will probably have to be Kevin followed by map, and then hoping you draw another uninkable, because I do think the rest of the hand is too valuable. If you draw into a strike, the family scattered will always be your discard here. If you draw into a book, then you do value inking the map. But other than that, the arms and the Potion of Malice and the Raging Storm in hand here is really, really strong. And this could just be enough to win you the aggro matchup. But maybe expectation in check somewhat, because of course, let's say you're on the draw here and they have the absolute nuts. There's very little you can do. So now I'm going to do a couple of examples of a scenario in which our hand is very much unoptimal. I'm just going to mulligan, and this is our hand. We're not going to mulligan this whatsoever, just for the example case of, let's say you mull 7 because your hand's terrible and you get this, or let's say you're a little inexperienced and the mulligan doesn't feel comfortable, and this is what you're stuck with. So, if we're blind, Sabotage is very difficult to consider inking here. I think the first ink will always be Battering Ram. I think once you see the colours in which they're playing, I apologise for the sounds of pause. There are 2 dogs fighting and playing in the background. But yeah, we're going to ink Battering Ram as your first ink here, pretty comfortably no matter what. You want to pay attention to what inks they're playing and then ink the Sabotage based on that. If they are in Ruby Amethyst, Sabotage will always go. If they're in Blurple, generally speaking, Sabotage will go, but obviously be aware of something like Source of the Vine. In the mirror, I would almost always value holding Sabotage here. I think it's very, very scary to ink this, because, you know, you lose an option into the mirror. Into Ruby Amber, I also would always hold Sabotage here, because the second they play a diary, dependent on what their board state is, you can Sabotage early, or you can Sabotage a second diary trigger, like a second diary coming down, to really mess them up. I think it's just dependent on what you kind of need out of the board state. If they have very, very little presence on board, very few cards in hand, and just a single diary, sabotaging the single diary can often win you the game. If they are developing a board quite intensely and you have a Sabotage with, they have 2 diaries on board, you could pop both diaries and then Raging Storm and then sort of establish. Either way, I think Sabotage can be a little too important sometimes. Okay, I'm gonna cut back here. There's been a lot of fuss behind me. Here we're gonna do something. We're gonna do a little bit of like a Ruby Amber, Webby's Diary kind of mulligan, just to give you an example. This matchup can be tricky. Oftentimes with the if you have a player who's well versed in the matchup, the Aladdin package can really mess with you here. But again, Buzz's Arm, Adventure Book, Strike a Good Match. These are staple cards that I would always hold. I think it's very, very rare to get rid of these. Strike being the most situational of the 3. Adventure Book, Buzz's Arm, I don't see you ever getting rid of in any hand, regardless of what it is. The Storm here is interesting. I would still get rid of it, even if you want a Storm before your opponent. The Freeze the Vine, I would like to recognize that in Ruby Amber it can be very important. However, you need it later, not now. Kevin can always go. Strange Things, whilst really good, I wouldn't value in the Ruby Amber matchup, because it's very rare early game that there are 2 characters on board that are questing, and oftentimes one of which is the Aladdin or a Reckless Body, which ignores the Strange Things effect anyway. So I would hold these 3, and we're going to go ahead and mull 4 here. And this hand is honestly really good. I think inking the strike and then inking the piercing attack is okay here. I think the rest of the hand is pretty comfortable, especially if we can situationally set up a turn 2 arm, turn 3 book, proc book, and then turn 4 possibly ink the strike. There are some lines I would like to explain where While strike a good match is really important, if your curve is turn 2 Buzz's Arm, turn 3 Book, and Proc Book, I would always start then inking the strike a good matches, because the My Adventure book, getting its triggers is more important. And getting your ink up is more important because you're still drawing cards at that point, and you're still going plus on card advantage. So I would always value the book over the strike, but if you don't have a Buzz's Arm, the strike is worth keeping. I'm just going to do one more Ruby Amber one here. I'm realizing editing this for me is going to be a bit of a nightmare with how many interruptions I'm having. These two will always go. Truthfully, regardless of matchup, these two will always go. Pizza Planet can sometimes be argued for the mirror. Oftentimes you can, dropping a location in the mirror can be really, really, really good because they just have no out to it early. Outside of that, I would never hold a location. Malicious Mean, I would very rarely keep unless it's aggro and you're on the play and you have a good hand. Incaster always goes. I would probably just hold the potion and the strike here. The potion, even in a Ruby Amber matchup, may not be worth it, so honestly we might just keep the strike. And then the hand is okay. Strike and Adventure Book, really, really great. The Strange Things is, again, really useful, but of course in Ruby Amber less so, because we just don't have... we have the Aladdins, we have the Ares, the Liquidators, stuff that can get through it with the Aladdin trigger. Yeah, this is, generally speaking, this one is isn't quite as strong as the previous hands, but this is still navigatable. Our early inks will probably be Malicious, Mean and Scary or a Battering Ram. The World's Greatest Criminal Mind can also often be inked, because Ruby Amber doesn't have a lot of targets until very late game for this. But it has more value to you than Battering and MMS do. So I would probably ink the Battering Ram first, followed by the Malicious Mean. Then if you strike and then you don't find another, you discard the Wither of Flower, and you'd probably ink the Criminal Mind. Because your goal is you're just trying to set up your draw engine and just draw through what you'll eventually see these cards again, and you'll see them in a situation where it's more important to you because you're setting up your draw engine and your ink, meaning that the MMS into Wither of Flower combo early is really doing very little for you, especially into a opposing deck that oftentimes has things with more than 3 health. Biggest examples are Scrooge and Aladdin. They're just not really going to care. And especially if you spend all those resources trying to remove that early game board state against them, they're just going to kind of eventually run away with it. I would much more value setting yourself up first. I think that's almost always the case with this deck, except for maybe aggro. And here we're going to do, just as another example, one last mulligan example here. Now, based on the principles we've held before, obviously the Buzz's Arm and Adventure Book will always stay. The Ram can go. The Potion of Malice could definitely stay. I think there is an argument that this should be the curve. This hand is honestly very good, so keeping the Pizza Planet for ink isn't a horrible decision either, but as far as the cards that are useful to us and the cards that don't have use to us, I think these 3 are really important, and I think these 4 are largely unimportant. And we receive an entirely inkable slate instead. Early inks will be dependent on matchup. If we see Amethyst, we always want to keep Horseman Strikes as long as possible. If we see, let's say, a Ruby Amber, the World's Greatest Criminal Mind will stay and the Horseman Strikes will go. If we see a Mirror, both of these will go because they are completely of no use to you. The Piercing Attack can be great for aggro, but if you're playing against Emerald Amethyst aggro, obviously Horseman Strikes. Or Pocahontas aggro, you hold Horseman Strikes. And then Malicious, Mean and Scary, if you see Pocahontas, you want to hold this too. The rest of... Honestly, this is a fairly difficult inking process, but again, it's going to be one of these 2 to start, depending on what colors you see. If you're going blind going first, then the safer one is Piercing Attack. You'd ink Piercing Attack first, then see what they're playing, and then ink one of these. depending on what you see. If you only see one color, you just have to make your best educated guess, or you ink the malicious, mean, and scary and take the risk. I think that can be fine too. This can also be kind of like context clue inferred. Like if they're turn one, if they're playing Amber, but their turn one is no character, then, well, chances are they're probably not playing aggro, or they just had a very bad hand. In which case, inking the malicious, mean, and scary might be okay anyway. And then the rest of the setup here is these three, and then just drawing into the rest of your tools and like adventure booking to keep going through your tools to get to that Raging Storm to just really set up. But for now, I think that's just going to do it on a little bit of a mulligan guide. Again, this one is going to be a bit messier with how many interruptions I've had, and I apologize for that. If you would like further mulligan guides, I can offer them maybe in like a Discord setting or something. You know, I don't think I need to do a second video, but I think this is just a basic understanding of what you might want to see early game. The deck can be really difficult, and I do definitely recognize that, but I really think it's important to just try and play and navigate the board state as best you can. Hold the book, hold the buzzer's arm, keep your situational removal that is relevant to you in that matchup, make context clue, and like the deck really shines when you know the format well. So make educated decisions based on what your opponent is playing. Recognize, oh, this deck doesn't really play evasives typically, let's ink the Horseman Strikes. This deck plays things that are less than 5 strength typically, let's ink the World's Greatest Criminal Mind. Hold your resources as long as you really can. Oftentimes you are stalling, but sometimes the stall can just be malicious, mean, and scary Potion of Malice to make things reckless, as opposed to your malicious, mean, and scary Wither a Flower to try and kill things. Your goal shouldn't always be to try and kill things with damage. Sometimes you just need to keep the damage on them for the reckless triggers and then just stall out for your board wipe. That can often be more important and generally better. If people are satisfied with this and don't want to see more Kevin-specific content after the fact, I will move on to the next deck guide. However, other than that, we're just going to move on past Kevin at least a little bit. Not to say that I'm going to completely forget about it. This is a deck I really, really enjoy, so I will probably produce content on it more regularly. But other than that, any requests or suggestions, I'm always happy to hear them. I really appreciate the support and the just incredible amount of people speaking and talking to me about how much they're enjoying and how much the guides genuinely help them. It feels really, really great. I've been very, truthfully, quite self-conscious about the fact that I'm like, oh, I'm only 100 games into this deck. How, like, is that enough to produce something this succinct and this important? And I do think maybe I'm just not giving myself enough credit. I do put a lot of time into these, and whereas, I appreciate the amount of support I get, and I will continue to push as hard as I can and really, really give you the highest quality and most in-depth versions of these guides that I can possibly give you. But outside of that, thank you for watching. I appreciate your support again, and I will see you in the next one.